Okay. Hello, everybody. Good evening. Oh, I'm very loud. I will hold it farther away. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to GPAC meeting number 14. It's good to be together again. I hope you enjoyed the month of June off. I'm just going to give a brief intro and update on what we've been doing. Simran's going to give a bit of an update on the land use alternatives, but the bulk of tonight we're actually going to be discussing active transportation, and we're joined this evening with the active transportation team, both from the city side. We have Derek and Jeff with our transportation division here with us tonight, as well as Nelson Nygaard, who's working with them on the active transportation plan, and Drew with Nelson Nygaard will be doing the bulk of the presentation tonight. So I briefly went over the agenda. Next slide. And next slide. Just to give a few staff updates of what's been going on and about to go on. On the 11th of this month, we went to the City Council meeting and gave City Council an update on the progress of the general plan, what we've been doing here at GPAC, as well as other activities, and discussed our approach for the land use alternatives and how we will be going out here in the summer and fall months to go talk to the community about those. So we just did that a couple of weeks ago. And then we are doing a lot of work this summer and fall on the Climate Action and Resilience Plan, which we're doing in parallel with the general plan. Actually, this week we will be holding 2 in-person workshops and open houses downstairs in the atrium for the community. That will be tomorrow night as well as Thursday night. If you know of anyone, please, who's interested in the topic or yourselves, feel free to attend. And then we'll also be doing a virtual one on August 11th, covering the same kind of topics and questions, but just virtually. And then this week we'll also be releasing a survey to the community about the topic and asking for feedback and input from the community that will run through August. Next slide. So just to touch base, we try to touch base every GPAC meeting, again, just as a reminder of the purpose of this meeting and this group. The GPAC is a sounding board for us, the general plan team, to discuss topics and ideas and get your feedback and input before we go to the larger community about topics and ideas. You are selected because you represent a wide variety of opinions, ideas, backgrounds, and we're selected to be that sounding board so we could hear for the full spectrum of the community. And then during the presentation, if we could, if members of the public would mind not chatting, if you'd like to chat, if you don't mind stepping outside, it's kind of echoey in here. And so you help us develop the visions and guiding principles and assist with public outreach when we need it. Some of you've helped in other community workshops as well and running small groups, and you really are the champions and ambassadors for this project. So as you see tonight, the meeting's really designed to be a dialogue with the GPAC, and just like other public hearings and meetings, there is opportunity for public comment and input at the end, but really the meeting isn't designed as a public forum. We have plenty of public engagement opportunities that we've had and will have coming up to really be an interactive forum for public engagement. So as you can see from this decision-making structure, GPAC is one of the engagement opportunities, but there's lots more, and we'll be entering into a lot of them this summer. There'll be workshop, pop-up events, more stakeholder interviews, going to the community councils and doing more surveys. So if you are out talking to the community and they want to know ways to engage with us, there's lots of activities coming up. Through that engagement opportunity and discussion, we then go to Planning Commission, who will be recommending, this will be what we'll be doing with land use alternatives, and they make a recommendation to the City Council, who ultimately approves each step, but also the general plan overall. Next slide. Here is just a quick screenshot, and we tried to share this at every GPAC meeting too, of the ways we've tried to get the word out. As you can see, we've done water bill mailers, flyers, posters, activity guides, social media, newsletters. We've tried every venue we have to try and get the word out about the general plan. Next slide. And these are the engagement efforts we've done to date, and we will be going through these same engagement opportunities with land use discussions in summer and fall. So be on the lookout for pop-ups throughout the community, workshops that we'll be doing, and other interviews and meetings we'll be attending. Next slide. I'm going to turn it over to Simran, who's going to talk a little bit about the land use alternatives and what those next steps are for that.
Thank you, Netta, and good evening, everyone. Good to see you all again today. As most of you know, I'm Simran Malhotra, principal with Ramey & Associates, and we are leading the general plan effort for the city of Ventura. What we wanted to do today is, we've been working with you over the last several months on developing land use alternatives, and our team is hard at work doing so. But I wanted to just remind you of the process we've gone through developing those alternatives, and we'll be back over the summer, as Netta just mentioned, to discuss the alternatives with the community, and then come back to you all with what we heard from the community before we go back to the council to get their final direction for the preferred plan. Next slide. Thank you. So as you know, this is a 6-phase process. We are in phase 3 and phase 4 right now, where we've been developing alternatives. It started with existing conditions analysis. We developed vision, themes, and guiding principles, as well as strategies, and those led to the alternatives process. The goal is that the alternatives will lead to a final land use plan for the city, as well as the goals and policies for all the topics that the general plan needs to address. So the land use alternatives, the purpose of these are to ensure that there's enough capacity in the city to accommodate future growth over the next 25 to 30 years, and see how that growth impacts the city's physical form. So the alternatives that we are developing based on the input we have received so far is will examine different ways that growth can be accommodated within the city. If you attended the City Council update on July 11th, we went into more detail about just some initial ideas of how that growth would be accommodated, but as I said, we'll be bringing back more detail about those based on the input we have received. The goal is to understand what the trade-offs are with different growth patterns. How does that affect transportation, VMT, GHG, emissions, energy use, access to parks, access to other amenities. The layout patterns that the alternatives explore will have different metrics that will show different results. So those will become those will guide the final selection of the land use plan that's selected. And then, of course, the land use alternatives are intended to implement the vision and the guiding themes that were selected or were endorsed by the council and developed by the GPAC with community input. Next, please. So this is a 8-step process, and you've been involved in this, so you all understand how this has proceeded, but I'll very briefly summarize how the alternatives are being developed. We started with identifying with the community as well as you all areas of change, which parts of the city should stay the same, and where there was a potential for accommodating growth or a different type of use. That led to a survey where we did a mapping exercise, as you might remember, and we had presented heat maps showing where the community felt change might occur. We brought those results back to you all, got additional feedback, and then over the last couple of months, in April as well as in May, we had about 8 hours or so working together, getting your ideas on what should happen in those specific areas of change. you all worked on those. The public also had an opportunity to provide their input at that point as well, and all the comments and the feedback and direction we got are influencing the alternatives that our team is currently developing. Once those are finalized, we'll be taking those back out to the community, we'll have workshops, pop-up events, a survey to get more widespread community feedback. And then we'll bring that feedback back to you to share with you, and then take that to the Planning Commission and the City Council for their review as well. Next slide, please. This is just a summary of what I just described, so I won't spend much time on this slide. This shows the heat map of where the community thought mixed use should go, for example, and then the sticky tabs and the various comments we received at the previous GPAC meetings. So in the next couple of months, we'll have a series of community events. We'll start with the alternatives workbook, which will describe what the 3 alternatives are, as well as the metrics that can be used to evaluate those and for themselves and also in relationship with each other. We'll have a public workshop, an open house, and various pop-up events. We'll be going to all the community councils to get their membership to provide feedback as well. And we'll be meeting with several other stakeholder groups too. And through this entire period, we'll have an online survey to gather additional input from the community. So that's the reminder and update on the land use alternatives. Yes, Sabrina.
I was just wondering, so I wasn't able to see the city council meeting, and I noticed Doug and Lori aren't here. Was there any feedback from the council regarding the progress to date?
I actually wasn't at the meeting, but I can give you the feedback and Neda can add to it. What we asked the council to do was to endorse the overall approach to developing the alternatives, including the growth projections, which were, Neda, you might want to add to this, which were the amount of growth should be enough to accommodate 2 or 3 RENA cycles. I think we've talked about the housing element and the 8-year cycle and the state mandated requirements for that. The council endorsed doing, so that was about between 10 and 15,000 units. And then to maintain the current jobs housing balance, which is jobs to every housing unit to maintain that. So the number of jobs would kind of relate to how many housing units are accommodated in the city. We also gave them an update on the climate action and resilience plan. And I'm not sure what specific feedback we got on that. That was more of an information item.
Thank you.
The meeting's recorded, right?
Yes. Yeah, of course, we can do that. So the general plan is a complex project, and to make it even more complex, ongoing. We have the local coastal program update, which is being done concurrently. As you know, the was with the 1989 comp plan, and with the 2005 general plan, the LCP was not updated. So it's been challenging for projects in the coastal zone to be approved because they end up needing to go their own approval processes. So as a part of this project, we'll be updating the local coastal program as well. The climate action and resilience plan, as Neda just mentioned, is ongoing. There are a series of workshops coming up as well as a survey which will describe what the GHG reduction measures are, and the goal is to have a draft plan available for review and adoption by the end of this year. The third ongoing plan is a historic context statement for the city. The first phase, which is the historic context statement, has been completed. Historic Preservation Commission has reviewed it and provided feedback, and it's going to the City Council for endorsement in, I believe, September. And then the final piece, which is the focus of today's meeting, is the active transportation plan. The general plan, the general plan has a circulation or mobility element which addresses all aspects of transportation. One piece of that is active transportation, which includes walking, bicycling, and transit use. So the active transportation plan focuses on those type of uses, while the general plan looks at transportation and circulation more holistically. Typically, ATP or active transportation plan would follow a general plan, but in this case it's being developed concurrently, partly because the city won a fantastic grant which has certain timing requirements, and I know we'll get into that a little bit more. So it's happening concurrently. So while the mobility element or the circulation element will look at transportation issues citywide on vehicle circulation, active transportation, as well as truck, etc., it'll have goals and policies at a pretty high level across to address all those topics. The ATP does a much more deeper dive into the active transportation related elements. It has specific programs and priorities that the city will address, and you'll hear about the detail from Jeff and Drew shortly. So I will, at this point, hand it over to Jeff to give a brief introduction on the active transportation plan, and then Drew to take the rest of it away.
Thank you, Simran. Jeff Herford, Principal Transportation Engineer for the City of Ventura. Thanks for having us here tonight. Really excited to be here to talk about active transportation, one of my favorite topics. As Simran said, we did receive a Caltrans Active Transportation Program grant to put together the ATP, just under $1 million. So we have a lot of funding there to put together a great plan. And as Simran said, the purpose of the plan is to develop a list of priority projects and programs to make biking and I'd like to also say rolling and walking and taking transit in the city of Ventura even better. I'll get to your question later. So arguably Ventura has been doing this active transportation for over 20 years. One of the first projects that I worked on when I got here in 2000 was Pierpont Boulevard. As you guys, I don't know if you remember, but it was 4 lanes. Now it's 1 lane in each direction. We provided nice wide bike lanes, pushed the cars towards the middle of the roadway, creating more buffer for pedestrians. So that's really kind of what the types of projects we're talking about here, and it's really rebalancing our roadway system. You know, for over 50 years we were very car-centric and we designed our roadways just based on cars. So we're really trying to reallocate that space for wider bike lanes, wider sidewalks, and more space for transit. So we're excited to do that. We've also, through our active transportation plan surveys, we've also seen that the request for more bike paths. And so the City of Ventura actually has 32.2 miles of bike lanes, which accounts for just about 40% of all bike lanes in the county of Ventura. So we're doing pretty good with that. We do know there's more opportunity there, more need there. We did just apply for an active transportation grant to construct 5 more miles of bike paths along the Santa Paula branch line. So we're continually, even though we're not done with the plan yet, there's opportunities out there, a lot of grant funding, so we're continuing to do that. And if I didn't say it already, that path would go from Montalvo out to Wells Road. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and a lot of green bike lanes, so you see a lot of work that's already been done out in the street. So I'm going to get over to Drew here. It was a very competitive selection process. A lot of consultants wanted to work in the city of Ventura to do the active transportation plan. So we're lucky enough to have Nelson Nygaard on the plan. And if I didn't already say it, I think we've been about 18 months into this so far, 18 months to 24 months. So we've had a lot of fun with it so far. So I'm excited to share with you where we're at with the project. So there you go.
Can I use that?
Do you want the stand?
Oh, yes. Oh, like that. Great. I apparently do. Great. Thanks, Jeff, for that great introduction. My name is Drew Van Hengel, and I'm a senior principal at Nelson Nygaard. I came to consulting after 15 years of working for the city of Santa Barbara, and so I'm especially excited to be working here in Ventura, having known Jeff and Derek and Tom for, I don't know, more going on 20 years, I think. Our presentation is broken down in a few parts. About the active transportation plan, specifically a description, actually I don't need to look at that, thank you, of a short description of the engagement that we've done to date, the overview of the goals and objectives as they've been advised by the active transportation focus group, as well as our community engagement, the safe routes to school, a complete streets element, and policy opportunities as they relate not only to the active transportation plan, but also to the general plan specifically. I'll be taking the presentation in parts, so hopefully we'll have some opportunity to hear your comments and your thoughts and your questions. It is, however, a many-part presentation, so we're thinking about 15 to 20 minutes per section, a little bit longer on the policy piece, and saving some room at the end for public comments unrelated to the active transportation plan, I think. So active transportation refers to all the ways people walk, bike, roll to where they need or want to go, because even those who identify as drivers are people who walk at some point in their journey, from our homes, workplaces, or commercial destinations to other connected places. And this includes people who use assistive devices, mobility devices, walkers, wheelchairs, as well as people who roll along on skateboards. So we're really talking about the people who use our streets who are more vulnerable to traffic conditions, perhaps, and who move at a slower pace. So we've got people who walk, people who bike, people who already bike. We want to make sure that we're developing a plan that serves people for whom that is their primary mode of transportation, as well as walking and transit, but also develop a system in Ventura that is so attractive and convenient and wonderful that we achieve some of the mode share goals that will be related to the general plan itself. Safe, efficient transportation options serve the area's economic needs through the movement of goods and people. It enhances the quality of life when our places to walk and bike are more attractive and safe. It provides access and removes, this plan will provide access and remove barriers of many types, including everything from infrastructure to policy and programs that prevent people from making the choice to walk or bike or take transit. And help support all the other goals, other project work that is underway now, like the CARP, which intends to reduce greenhouse gases, obviously, as people move out of single occupant vehicles and into other modes. We help to achieve many of the planned goals that are in front of the city of Ventura today. Our contract is broken up into 4 parts. Even though we're creating an active transportation plan, there are elements within the contract which are a little bit unique and were well scoped out by the city before our request for proposals was released. So there's a plan to improve biking. There is a 2011 plan that this active transportation plan will update. There will be a network defined where a primary bikeway network with a set density where it would be convenient for people to get to the bikeway network, so that we can prioritize some streets on a network for bicycling, but not other streets because there are competing needs related to movement of freight, transit, things like that. And at the end of the plan for people biking, we'll have a priority projects and programs for this to chart the city forward towards a better and more bikeable future. The plan for people walking similarly I will say we'll develop networks and districts where people walking will be a priority. There's a baseline that we expect that through policy that we want to see in Ventura, which is it should be safe for people to walk along any street. But some streets will be more specifically enhanced with a streetscape and an environment that helps people connect to destinations which are within walking distance of where they live or where they work. This is Ventura's first pedestrian plan. It's a little bit new to the industry that we plan for people walking. It was kind of a pedestrian topic until about 10 years ago, and then cities started realizing, oh, we actually need to plan for this and invest in places for people to walk safely so that we avoid serious and fatal injuries, and we support people who are already making that choice, and we attract more people to walking. Similarly to the bikeway element of the active transportation plan, we will prioritize programs and projects that will be competing for capital improvement program funding, for grant funding, for implementation. And we'll be prioritizing and phasing all the projects that were gathered both through community input and also through our evaluation of what should be the primary pedestrian and bikeway networks. There's a third element of the contract related to Safe Routes to School. That's a Safe Routes to School plan that builds on the existing guidance and produces two key deliverables: new suggested routes to school maps. There's the California law that specifies in the manual for uniform traffic control devices that all cities should provide suggested routes to school maps for school districts. They're very hard to get to. I'm wondering if any of you have seen one. Okay, a couple of hands, great. Well, Tom doesn't count. But they sit in a place typically, which is not a criticism of Ventura Unified or the city itself, they typically sit in a place where they are difficult to find, and we're trying to create an innovative map that can be used not only for the first time school goers, but also to integrate into curriculum and to other places where they might get more regular use than they do now. And we're still trying to figure out what that format is for that. But what we have done is assessed all the schools throughout the city, and I'll talk about that a little bit more, and we're prioritizing recommendations for school access to achieve a stated mode share goal of 40% of your students walking or bicycling to school in the future. And I can tell you that number is much, much lower than that today. And then finally, the complete streets elements. There are two deliverables related to that task: new standards and guidance for making decisions to build and maintain more complete streets in Ventura. And then, well, that's mainly it. So I'll move on to the next slide. What types of, how do we make a system where bikeways and walkways safely get people where they want to go? We put in new infrastructure. As Jeff mentioned, there is a lot of advances that have been made over time, kind of opportunistically here in the city. Some really capstone or milestone projects exist already, but how do we connect those places where people feel safe walking and biking with more places, so connecting the system to itself so it's continuous. So you can expect that the plan will include new bikeways, recommendations for better crossings which are separated either by time or space from vehicle conflicts, better sidewalks, more sidewalks where none exist, and new trails, as Jeff mentioned. Other types of projects include bicycle education programs, informational campaigns, protected intersections that might go along with protected bikeways, traffic signal or operational changes, placemaking, and elements that can go readily into the pavement maintenance program. A little bit about our schedule. We've been at this a little bit less than 18 months, I guess. Spring of 2021, we completed our existing conditions report, and we've started our first round of surveys and focus groups. In the fall of last year, we did a code and policy review, which includes recommendations for how to support decisions that help the city act on its commitment to make walking and bicycling excellent here. In the winter of 21-22, we started developing these networks, which I described, which are sketch networks that define where it would be a priority, for example, to make bicycling improvements and bicycle facilities that are low traffic stress, which is a term that we use to describe places where people, family members would feel safe riding with each other, where parents might say, yes, I'm going to take my young child with me, or new riders might say, yeah, that place feels good to me, and so therefore, instead of riding on a street that's dedicated for all modes, might ride up a couple of streets to ride on a street where bicycling was a priority. So we drafted a bikeway network, and we drafted a pedestrian network, and then we circulated that with our ATFG, and we put that on hold in order to sync up more cleanly with the general plan process, because the land use and transportation alternatives are of course have a relationship to the bikeway transportation network, and we want to make sure we're sunk both with the growth scenarios and with the complete streets and typology of streets that will come out of the general planning process. So in the spring, we put this work, we finished the draft work on the networks, and then we moved into developing evaluation criteria to help support where projects should be prioritized according to a set of criteria that I'll talk about later. And we're looking forward to doing the following pieces of work: selecting and prioritizing projects and programs, drafting the plan for adoption, and having some pop-up installations which are used both to kind of understand what the impacts of potential projects might be from an operational perspective, but also to hear from the community what they think of these types of projects, which create a lower stress environment for people walking and biking. And then our schedule anticipates at this time that we'll wrap up in the winter, that we'll release a draft plan for public review sometime in the late fall, and work on that towards an adoption in the winter of 2023. So a little bit about our engagement that I referenced previously. I'm just going to, these slides represent some of the public-facing content that we had both on our active transportation plan website, as well as Instagram and Facebook Live and in-person pop-ups. I'm just going to run through the catalog of engagement that we've done to this point. We did a citywide survey, as I mentioned. We received 1,326 comments from, we had 1,326 people take that survey, and 582 people drew on this map that identified places where they enjoyed to walk or bike, but also places where they didn't really enjoy it and thought that it needed improvement. And that survey, that combined survey and mapping led us to understand the demographic breakdown of people who took the survey, and we did find, not surprisingly, that low-income and Spanish language-speaking people were underrepresented in our survey pool, as well as the very young and the very old. So we turned that information into a pivot in our engagement plan, and we started to do some focus groups. So we did focus groups and pop-ups at the Transit Center and the Marketplace, and then we did 8 invitational focus groups with a variety of focuses, reaching 120 people in a more intentional and conversational format. During that same period, we also visited all the neighborhood councils and presented at all 7 with about 125 attendees at those meetings. What our main takeaways were after that point were that 2/3 or more of the respondents indicated that they would walk more with improved sidewalks and pathways and more interconnected off-road trails and walking paths. As Jeff mentioned, this Ventura residents and people who have responded to our survey are really they love the trails and the pathways that already exist. They'd like to see more opportunities for off-street connections, both for walking and biking. 80% of the people who took this survey stated that they might bike more if there were more off-street bike paths, with 58% saying that they might bike more with more on-street bike lanes. After that fall engagement, we did a citywide workshop in May. 68 people attended that workshop, which was virtual, and we hosted it for 2 weeks online through one of the platforms, Facebook something, I think. And 176 people in total went in combination to either the real-time or the asynchronous workshop, and then also did surveys. We placed ads in the Breeze before each of our engagement pieces in September and January to promote the survey and the workshops. We also did some some things that were new for us in Nelson Nygaard. We did some, with the support of the communications team right here at the city, we did some Instagram, what are they called? Instagram Live, I want to say. Derek did one, and I did one. 100 accounts were reached through these, through each of these sessions. I don't know what they're called. And we have a following on all the platforms now, which is not huge, not like, you know, a superstar, but huge for active transportation. And then we've been hosting office hours, which you can sign up for at any time on the active transportation Ventura. What's the website address? Oh my gosh. activeplanventura.com. You can sign up at any time for 15-minute intervals of office hours, and one of our staff takes that appointment, and we hold time on our schedule daily so that folks who haven't heard about it or have questions can have a one-on-one conversation with us. So at this point, I'd like to just ask if you have any thoughts or comments on the project as it's defined or the stakeholder engagement. And I think that one of you is going to help with the microphone. And how do I manage this? Okay.
Thank you. Well, I hope this is the appropriate part, but I was wondering about the pedestrian plan and how it considers the handicapped, those people in wheelchairs, walkers, canes, deaf, blind.
Great, thank you for your question. Yes, the active transportation plan is a plan for all people who are using sidewalks, and we have been doing, we did focus groups. We reached out to the senior centers. The specific name is escaping me right now, but we reached out there to try to speak with people who are older and facing potential mobility impairments. We've also done outreach via, there's some neighborhood council reps who pointed us to one-on-one conversations. What we can anticipate in terms of the outcome of the plan is that there will be policy recommendations that intend to elevate the experience of people with disabilities, and that there will also be integrated elements in the Complete Streets recommendations that ensure a universal design as opposed to a basic ADA compliance, so that when we make decisions in the future, we make them so that facilities are excellent for all people regardless of their mobility.
Yes, Nick. And while I'm handing this over to you, members of the public, the Q&A is right now focused on what the GPAC members have, and if you can save your questions for the public comment period. Thank you.
How long will we have for public comment?
Yeah, we'll need more.
You can wait till the answer. Thank
How
you.
long will each person have for public comment?
We'll let you know at the answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting, compelling information, lots of stuff to study. I'm a local architect, and so one of the things I grapple with on a fairly regular basis is parking, and I pretty much can't design anything without first figuring out how many cars I can cram onto the property. What I would love to understand, and I don't know that you can answer this tonight, but in weaving together the strategies, can we find a nexus between areas in the community where we could actually reduce or eliminate parking requirements altogether and focus on pedestrian-only, nucleus in certain, locations? And I know that's kind of a big ask, but we're supposed to be visioning. So maybe you could speak to some of that.
I'll say we will first appreciate your comment and then emphasize how important the partnership is between community development and public works to implement and discuss those kinds of things, and I'm sure they'll be part of the general plan process.
And Nick, you raise a very important and good point. I think in the general plan, we'll start to develop goals and policies related to that, and then it'll be implemented through the changes to the parking requirements in the zoning code. But that's certainly something to continue to explore as a group and in the general plan.
I guess my main interest is how safe streets and complete streets integrate with that.
Yes,
Yeah.
I hear you. Gotcha.
Yes, Pete?
Yeah, this might be more for Simran or Neda. In your introduction and in Jeff's, you both mentioned public transit as part of the ATP, and I know as part of the focus group, we've been just focused on pedestrian and bicycling. So is there going to be another element of the general plan where we address public transit?
I can address how we're addressing it with the active transportation plan first, and then maybe you can take it for the general plan.
Of course.
As you know, from your work with us, our focus related to transit is getting people to transit and ensuring that when they get to transit, like they have a safe place to leave their bike, or they can have a way to take their bike with them. So it's more of like what the perspective we take is more related to the first and last mile before or after a person takes a transit trip. And so we're not doing things like route service recommendations as part of the active transportation plan or prioritizing transit streets, but we are being informed by what streets are currently transit priority streets.
As far as the general plan is concerned, we are working with BCTC, Gold Coast Transit, Metrolink to consider transit improvements within the city. The general plan won't necessarily have the upgrades to those specific systems as to specific lines, but it'll have enough direction in there to influence what the transit providers do at their end as they improve services and their operations.
Okay, so will that come back to the GPAC and the circulation element?
That's right. Yes, Bill.
I think something that would be helpful for everyone is, I don't think we're all working from a common vocabulary in terms of all of the different transportation options, and some of the stuff that you find, like what I call street furniture, within the right-of-ways or the sidewalks. And if we could, develop that common language so that we're all saying the same thing and what we mean, by it. And then finally, in terms of first mile, last mile, are we talking about electric vehicle charging as part of that also, so that we can start switching over there? And then I'm going to make my pitch again. I know we talk about biking and walking, but I think the micro-mobility, the e-scooters, and I know I did see a mention up there of it, but I think that really needs to be part of this discussion, because I see it becoming more and more, a solution for that last mile.
Thank you, Bill. Any other GPAC comments? Otherwise, we'll keep going with the rest of the presentation.
Great, thanks. So the next section of our agenda is focused on the goals and objectives of the active transportation plan. The draft Ventura goals and objectives are based on the general plan vision, the already existing 2011 bicycle master plan, and themes from the first phase of our public engagement. The goals are, I'll start with equity, maintenance. Actually, I should probably start with connectivity. I'm going to start with connectivity. Connectivity, education and encouragement, equity, maintenance, project delivery, and safety. And I'm just going to define each of them for you and kind of the planning terms related to them. Goals are general statements of desired outcomes of the community. In other words, what does Ventura hope to achieve with the active transportation plan? And objectives help document the steps needed to realize those goals. What will Ventura need to do to meet its goals? And for each of the goals and objectives, we intend to identify performance measures so Ventura staff and citizenry can assess how well we're doing in implementing the plan and achieving the goals. I'm just going to read each of the goal statements for you. So the connectivity goal is to create walking and bicycling networks that allow people to get where they need to go with comfort and ease. And on the right are objectives that we have identified, which are what the pieces of what Ventura will need to do in order to connect, to build on that connectivity goal. And overall, the summary of that is to connect facilities to themselves. In other words, to eliminate some of the gaps between the facilities, and also connect facilities to destinations that people want to go to from places that they are coming from. So both across the city and across neighborhoods and local destinations. The second goal in this order, is education and encouragement. The goal statement for that is to give Venturans opportunities to learn skills, build confidence, and have fun walking and bicycling. The city already has a school-based, middle school-based education program, which is about 3 years, I'd say, or so in the making, in the actual enacting. And this, one of the ways that Ventura can achieve this education and encouragement goal is to expand that program to other grades and other modalities. Things like events, safe routes to school programs, and signs and other campaigns to help all road users know what the laws are related to people who are not driving on our streets. The third goal is equity, and this is related to the Progress Initiative that the City Council recently issued. Everyone has the right to travel safely on City of Ventura roadways, regardless of race, socioeconomic status, gender, identity, age, and ability. There are objectives related to these goals, related to providing such as providing excellent options for people who don't have access to cars or who don't drive, providing excellent infrastructure for people using mobility devices such as wheelchairs, creating connections to transit stops, schools, senior housing, and neighborhoods with low income and car-free households, and integrating equity into all aspects of the development and implementation of projects and programs. I think I'm on the fourth goal now, which is maintenance. We heard loud and clear through our engagement, the community members are concerned that things that are built need to be well maintained, and also that they need to remain available for use through things like street sweeping. So that, I don't know if I already said it, but the goal is to keep Ventura's walking and bicycling facilities clean and in a good state of repair. The next goal is the project delivery goal, and the statement around that is to standardize processes within the city and for developers or jurisdictional partners to integrate walking and bicycling into planning and project development. And this is related to that piece of community development and public works working together to meet common goals through decisions that integrate complete streets elements into all stages of project development, whether it's capital or land development, standardizing an approach to design review and requirements, connecting new developments to the walking and bicycling networks, which I mentioned, and having common public communications about projects. And the final goal is safety, and the goal statement around this safety goal is to keep everyone on streets and paths safe through engineering design and supportive amenities. There are several objectives within here. These are things like prioritizing slow speeds, separating people walking, biking, and driving with increasing levels of separation as the volumes of people walking or biking increase or as the speeds of automobiles increase. And that would be dependent upon the street types mainly. Providing dedicated space for people moving dependent upon their speed, providing pedestrian scale lighting, and there was a lot of interest from the community in providing secure bicycle parking. So at the citywide workshop, as I mentioned, we surfaced these goals, and workshop participants confirmed that these are the right goals, and we got input on the objectives for each goal and where and how to prioritize investments to achieve each goal. And from that, we moved into a framework for a prioritization process, which proposes how to prioritize active transportation projects in relationship to each of these goals. The process will inform a weighted values-based evaluation framework to score project and program potential to achieve the goals. And the city is currently reviewing our proposed methodology for prioritizing and phasing the projects and programs that will be illuminated in our future phase of work. We also got feedback about where to prioritize investments based upon connectivity, equity, and safety, and how to prioritize investments. In other words, what types of facilities, once high priority locations are identified, what types of facilities should be recommended for them? Should it be a path? Should it be an on-street bike lane because it's a relatively low volume street and people would feel comfortable with that? Or should it be a protected bike lane? So that's the how part. And the when part, which is still under consideration, is what criteria should be used in order to decide which programs and projects that might all be in a bucket of very, very important projects or programs should be done first, because they can't all be done at the same time, but they might need to be phased depending upon funding availability, cost, feasibility, investments, like the last time neighborhoods were invested in, whether they could be phased with the pavement maintenance program, and whether they fill a low traffic stress gap. So at this point, I would like to let you know that I summarized that we are done with the section related to goals and how they inform the prioritization process, and we'd love to hear from you any thoughts you have about that.
Yes, Casey.
I have a question regarding the project delivery element. Something that it seems like you might be touching on is how developers think about accessibility, maybe in regards to parking, which has been lightly discussed earlier. Is there any vision for the city, or does this plan inform anything moving forward? Or maybe we, I don't know, if reduce parking requirements for new developments is too strong of verbiage, but I'm wondering if there's thought going into, as the city moves forward, how this informs how much parking we put in future real estate developments.
Go ahead.
I think I shared some thoughts on that earlier, but if this general plan, if there's a policy in the general plan that says to explore reduced parking requirements for new developments, then that will be implemented through changes to the zoning code, and that'll be a follow-on item of the adoption of the general plan. And then, as a part of that, like this already happens in downtown, there's a shared parking district, so individual businesses don't have to provide their own parking. They can share the pool of parking that's available in and around downtown. That approach can be expanded to other areas that are identified as a part of the general plan, but implemented through the zoning code.
So does the ATP have any bearing on how those decisions are made moving forward?
I think and Drew can add to this, the connection between identification of a district to where walking and bicycle use is more primary than vehicular use. That location and the projects that need to make that happen in a safe manner would be a part of the ATP. But the identification of those would happen in conjunction with the ATP and the general plan land use.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. So I'm curious, and this might not be the right time to ask this question, but it seems like what we're talking about is encouraging these alternative transportation forms. Have you found in other cities that by increasing people's walkability or rideability, that it has diminished the number of cars in a community, or is it just that people drive their cars fewer miles? Or maybe none of those things? Because I think as we talk about parking, I mean, when I visit other cities, what I find is that people, even when they still have cars, they just don't use them as often. It's not, so I'm questioning whether it would actually reduce the need for parking in neighborhoods as much as maybe reduce the use of cars in particular neighborhoods. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. This is such a long research question. Yeah. But here are some things. Here are some things that we know, that as people, as the cost of parking and the cost of driving goes up, people look for other modes. I mean, because our household budget only extends so much, and so in cities where there are options that are excellent, we see the mode share go up. Then the other thing that we know is some of their shared, like people will probably continue to need cars, right? But there are many studies around shared vehicles like Zip cars or Get Around or Turo, these cars, personal and private car sharing services, that those services have done that describe the percentage of people who actually left their car behind, like sold their car because they had what they needed, because they lived in a place with many transportation options and they had the option to use a car that they didn't have to own. So, and then when similar studies would show, but they're not all making this connection you're the the parking supply is reduced, people drive less because there's fewer cars parked there. This is mainly related to residential, of course. So these things are all connected, and in my mind, they're all related to having an excellent transportation options around the board that serve your community's needs, so that people can, and also land use scenarios that make it possible to get your goods, get to your job, get to your goods and services, get what you need without having to hop in a car. So it's all connected. And I just wanted to get back to parking. What will be a part of the active transportation plan is a decision-making rubric around when it's appropriate to trade off on-street parking for other uses. And we've historically dedicated that curb lane to car storage. And if we want to develop a city where we have these one of the excellent transportation options is a network of bikeways that people feel safe and comfortable riding along, then there will need to be conversations about where parking is more highly valued or vehicle storage is more highly valued than movement of people.
And if I can add one more thing, unbundling of parking, especially for residential developments, has been explored in other cities, and that's something that the general plan can also consider as a policy.
So I'm not certain where this question or comment fits with everything else, but I recently, just last week, took a walk on a street that I only drive on. It was Midtown. Long story is how I ended up walking miles up and down there. It was not a terribly pleasant walk. And, oh my gosh, there's so much cool stuff in Midtown that I had no idea about because I always just drive right by it. And we've been talking a lot about neighborhoods and trying to create a neighborhood feel. And I even walked into some of these stores and I told them I was on the GPAC and asked them questions about, they really would like to be better known than they are. And I don't know where it fits in all of this, that, that's a major corridor and I drive on it all the time too. And it just occurred to me, so we don't have parking on there and we have some extra space to actually make walking pleasant. Trees would be nice and a little bit more space, whatever, but golly, it's a really cool area. And, so how can we use transportation adaptations, changes, to let places like that flower more?
Thank you, Dana. That's a good question. I think that's something we will continue to explore in the general plan process. And
this is related to your comment about the common vernacular, about what kind of streetscape elements really make people stop and see, enjoy their experience, be able to rest if they have mobility challenges, be able to feel like they're not exposed to an unpleasant experience, but rather have a streetscape that is supportive of an experience that is excellent. And so I think your comments are kind of connected to each other, related to having that common definition of what belongs where, depending upon what type of street you're on.
Okay, Stephanie, and then I want to make sure we keep
We're
on
fine
track.
on time.
There's quite a bit of presentation to go through, but maybe Stephanie.
Yeah, this is probably fairly quick and a follow-up to what we were just talking about. And I'm not necessarily advocating for 500 plans, but in light of an active transportation plan and a pedestrian plan, are tree plans a thing? Can we have a plan just dedicated to urban tree cover? Because it really does make walking, biking, and it does make active transportation itself so much more nice. And I mean, even just, I stayed a week up in Ojai at a friend's house to house sit, and there's so many, mature oak trees. It was so nice walking in the morning. And I was like, dang, it'd be so nice to have this down in Ventura. But yeah, tree plants, I don't know if it's a thing, but it would be dope.
It is a thing. The city does have a tree master plan that it just adopted maybe a year or so ago and had a steering committee in regards to it. It's managed by our urban forestry division of the city. Our downtown specific plan has certain streetscapes, again with this common vernacular, that identify sidewalk widths, street trees, patterns, and things like that. That's definitely doable and something that we 100% agree should be continued to be leveraged and expanded. Absolutely. So it exists, it's a real thing.
I have a couple quick questions, then a longer one. But the first one is just, I saw chariot rides as a thing. What is a chariot ride?
So we capitalized on a pre-existing engagement method that Bike Ventura had utilized. I think it was for the general plan, wasn't it? The first chariot ride? No. It was part of the general plan. Okay, so there wasn't. So Bike Ventura supported a kind of like a policy ride. We did broadcast throughout the city, come and take this ride. I think we had about 30 or 40 people show up, and they had actually literally have a chariot that was towed behind somebody's bicycle, and one of the staff members, I think from Bike Ventura, broadcast from the back of the chariot, like, Roman chariot style, come and talk with us about the active transportation plan. And so people came out of their homes and they talked with us about their experience walking. Mainly it was off in West Ventura by the bike hub, thank you. And we spent about an hour and a half just riding up and down all those local streets that cross the main drag there, and got some great input and asked people to take the survey, which was available both in English and Spanish. And that's what a chariot ride is.
Okay, thank you. Second question, I don't know that we got this slide deck with all the goals that you guys were mentioning earlier, and so I only got to see the kind of the goal slides each time that you went through them. And to have comments on them with that quick of like seeing them, I don't know if that's something, Netta, that we were sent, but I'd love to be able to see these again so I could just kind of look at what the goals were, and you can point that out to me. That'd be great.
Sure, they were in the PowerPoint deck that we sent.
The PowerPoint is available on the project website right now, so you will have access to those to look at and provide additional feedback if you have some. In the interest of time, if it's okay with you all, there's quite a bit still to cover, and I want to make sure there's time at the end for public comments. If we can keep going, if that's okay with everyone.
Yeah, I would just say that, yes, so the deck can be found or recirculated to the GPAC after this meeting. We're happy to hear your thoughts on, more detailed thoughts on the goals, but more specifically on the objectives, because the goals are kind of standing still right now because of our advisory group. But if you have thoughts about what objectives we might be missing, about what Ventura needs to do to accomplish those goals, we would love to integrate them.
And later on in the presentation, there are policy opportunities that are being discussed in a fair amount of detail, and those tie back to the goals and objectives. So that'll be a chance for you all to provide additional feedback. Philip, why don't you can be the
Zoom happy face button.
You can give a physical
on the last slide you just had up there on the priorities. So my question is on the list on the left side, how to prioritize investments. They all look important, so I'm wondering how would you go about deciding? Is that a prioritized list, or is there quantitative criteria that's used, or how do we address the project that comes up when obviously they're all competing?
Yes, it's going to be complicated. It's going to be a massive spreadsheet. Oops. But which starts with the where. What locations are most important to invest in? And so we have defined criteria like near schools, or near places with high concentrations of older adults and low-income people, or near commercial destinations. These are kind of geographic, or where collisions have happened. So we have geographically or spatially, we can geographically and spatially identify where in the city it will be important to invest and make walking and biking better for people who are already doing it, and also because there's a high probability that with better infrastructure, people might be more motivated to use it and shift modes out of their cars. And then we're going to ask ourselves, based upon the locations that are most important to invest in, how do we invest in it so that it is going to be an excellent experience? If, for example, there's a principal arterial, which is a 4 to 6 or 8 lane street that is very important to the bikeway network, and it's very important because it connects places and lots of crashes happen there, we're not going to say, let's put a shared lane marking there, because that is not the right facility type. So that's the how question is. Once we've identified what should go in those places that are important to invest in. And we will be developing we have already actually started to develop project types that kind of make that distinction between this place as a place for shared lane markings because the traffic volumes are very low and the speeds are very low, and this other place is a place for a protected bike lane because it's not going to be attractive or safe to do something less than that. So we're going to use our judgment to identify the how. In other words, what exactly will the project be in the places that are important to invest in? And then so does that answer that question for you? Do you have more? I know. Sure. And then the when comes separately because that's tied into like decision making that will happen over time. We can describe the when right off the bat when we're done with this plan, but Jeff and Derek and their director will have to every year kind of decide whether this is the when for the next highest bank of projects.
Just before we move on, Josh, to cover a little bit more of your question, on the materials list from tonight's agenda, and we'll send out this presentation to you, there was also the ATP Code and Policy Review, which has a presentation with all of this same information, as well as their existing conditions report and the presentation from the Transportation Education Forum, which covered both topics. So you can look at that, and there's a lot of info in there as well. So if you guys are looking through any of that and have questions, please feel free to reach out to us or Jeff and Derek, and we're happy to answer any questions. With that, we'll move on to the next piece.
Great. So this is the section of the agenda where we're going to talk about the Safe Routes to School components of our project. Here are some intentions for our planning work. The Ventura Safe Routes to School work will increase the number of students biking, walking, and rolling to school, produce new maps that show the best roads to walk to your school, which I already talked about, propose new school travel safety programs, and create a list of street or other types of infrastructure projects that will be near schools. Just one second. We did field work as a team of 4 in the fall. We visited all the schools during either the arrival or dismissal period to identify kind of the behaviors that we saw. Some of the typical school behaviors which are undesirable are double parking, letting your student out of the car while you are double parking, stopping mid-intersection and letting your student out and then driving or not driving away. Some of the desirable behaviors that we see in schools are people crossing the street with their students where there are crossing guards or marked crossing locations. Well, that's a very good behavior. We see lots of not so great behaviors in all the schools we visit around the country. And so we look at those behaviors to say, how can the infrastructure be adjusted to make this otherwise not so great behavior legal, or can we make some improvements that would make it easy for people to make the choice that was more safe. We don't tend to do things like help schools with their pickup and arrival and dismissal lines. Like, we don't really care about how long that car line gets at a school unless it's blocking a bike lane, right? And so we don't get into, like, when schools say we need help with our surface parking lot, we don't say, like, we're going to help you do that, because we know that more cars will come if we improve the access for parent drop-off or caregiver drop-off by car, we're not doing our job. So our job is really to look at the behavior, see if there are infrastructures that can support a better behavior. So you talk about campaigns and policy or program work that could raise people's awareness of how easy it could be to walk or bike with your student, or have that be like the equivalent of a carpool, a walking school bus, or a bike train. So we did these in the field assessments and identified places where we thought it might be a good idea to have an infrastructure change. And we also had workshops with students, and these were really lovely. The purpose of these workshops were to understand what programs, engagement, and education campaigns can build a culture of safe, active transportation to school. We invited 9 elementary and middle schools to participate based on the administrator's interest in safe routes to school. And that was through 2 phases. Once when we told them we were going to be at their schools, like just a pro tip, don't show up at schools without letting the administrators know that you're going to be there, because every family is like worried about the stalker with the clipboard. And so when we reached out and did a survey we talked to each of the administrators before we went out into the field to identify hotspots that they were concerned about, and then sometimes they engaged with us when we did the field work, and then we contacted all of them again by phone later on. And many of them said, yes, we want our students to be involved in this creation of a better walking and biking future. The takeaways across the district were that most students are dropped off by car. If you leave your home or your work in that school arrival or dismissal period, you know that the traffic is much different in that time before and just after school. Most students, however, that we talked to in those 9 workshops said that they would prefer to walk, bike, or ride the bus. The top stated reasons that students said that they would rather walk, bike, or take the bus included that they have themselves a poor pickup and drop-off experience. And you can imagine all the ways in which a student who is being escorted by car could have a negative experience. It can be anything about the infrastructure, the emotions, all kinds of things. And also that they enjoyed biking and walking and they wanted that exercise. So this was a small sample, of course, but it was really engaging and kind of validating that this idea that having more students walk and bike to school is actually something that the students themselves want. And some of the ideas that we did a little bit of, we supported the students in this conversation about ideas that might be fun for them because some of these ideas they've never seen themselves. But we introduced them to the concepts of traffic gardens, which are kind of miniature street networks where kids or adults can practice riding a bike and staying within the lines and practice stopping and going, what they should do when they cross painted railroad crossings on the ground. These are typically, they can be built to any size. They can be built the size of this room. They can be built to the size of a larger surface parking lot or a playground. We also introduced them to the idea of walking school bus and bicycle trains, which are, as I described, something like a carpool for students who are walking or bicycling. And those were the 3 ideas that were most popular among the students that we spoke with. And so, again, just to sum up the work with the Safe Routes to School action plans, we visited 25 schools. We documented our citywide school findings and also by each school what their primary issues were. We described the existing conditions from the questionnaire and site visits, and then we made program and policy recommendations for the district as a whole. There'll probably be like one set of program and policy recommendations for all schools, but also suggested infrastructure improvements that are specific to each school if they're not close to other schools, or school clusters for those schools that are located, for example, across the street from each other. And so that concludes my overview of the Safe Routes to School element. Anybody have thoughts or comments that they'd like to share about Safe Routes to School or our approach?
I was just curious if you had gotten any feedback from the high schoolers about their preferred, like what they'd like to see. I live over by Ventura High School up in the hillside, and every morning is an absolute disaster area with kids trying to park, like you described, the terrible like drop-off things, people making U-E's in the middle of the road, and I have multiple heart attacks, like watching kids almost get hit by cars. I'm like, why is there not a crossing guard? You know? I'm like, why is this happening? And I did actually speak to someone in the city about this a couple of years ago, and I was basically told because no one's been killed that like they're not going to do anything, which I think is just a terrible method. And that whenever you can clearly see there's a problem, it's a problem waiting to happen, and it's nearly happening basically every morning. So I was just curious about what was discussed with the high schoolers. I know that e-bikes are becoming very popular, so it would be wonderful to see and feel that my child could be safe, like going to school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very hard to engage with the high schools where a couple of things happen. Once the parents are like so relieved that they no longer have to do pick up and drop off, and so that's one thing that happens there. And then all schools, the short answer to your question is we didn't get any high schoolers to participate in focus groups. All schools are challenged when somebody comes from the outside and says, we have something we'd like to do with you that is not instructional. It's very hard to get time for that. When we did visit the schools, though, we did observe what you described. And when we were there, we heard things mainly related to the speed of drivers going past the schools. Like that was the primary concern of most of the high school staff who were out during the arrival or dismissal time. I think there's a lot of opportunity here, and hopefully when we circulate the action plans with the district, we'll get some ideas about how we can engage the older students more, and we'd be happy to do that.
Yes, Stephanie.
Just in that regard, would Ventura College be included in that program? Or like, were they reached out to, curiously?
We reached out to them for different reasons, but we didn't do a Safe Routes to School audit for them.
Yes, Kelsey.
What percentage of students currently either take the bus or walk or bicycle to school rather than get dropped off?
I want to say it's something like 4%, but I don't have the number with me right now. That feels about right. I mean, don't publish it, but it's in that single digit.
Yeah, the reports would have that information, right?
We have the information from our work with the schools, but I just don't have the detailed slide.
Sure.
But it will be posted on our website once that memo is finalized.
So, full disclosure, I'm the president of our school board, so that's why I...
Sorry if I offended you.
No, you didn't at all. But I would just say, I do have a question, but first, those numbers are really low, and in part, some school districts around the country and around our county have gotten rid of school busing completely because it's so expensive. But aside from that, as we've moved to a model where parents have choice in where they send their kid, a lot of kids don't attend their neighborhood school. So busing is not an option if you're attending Mound, right? Like, because you might live downtown and you're going to go far away, and that just doesn't make sense for busing. I did want to just say, though, I would love to have this presentation for our board, because I do think there are policy decisions that we make which would really be great to factor in more the active transportation modeling. And then the other question I have is, Ventura College has a grant to allow their students to ride public buses for free, which I think is fantastic. Is there any interest in getting that for our high school students? Because I really feel like there probably isn't the comfort level for many families in having middle schoolers on public buses, although we used to live in New York and I'd see second graders on the subway. But could we get to a place, at least as a city, where we prioritize public transportation for our high school students? Because I think it would be really a win for everyone.
That's a great point, and we'd be happy to visit the school board. Both of those points are great, and thank you for clarifying some of the things I missed about why it is so challenging to use active transportation to get to school here.
Other questions on this part of the presentation? Okay, let's keep going.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Was it a possibility, I know you
ask the kids about the active transportation plan? Were the parents involved? Because I think maybe an obvious thought that I have, having been a parent of a VUSD school, scheduling, what time the school starts, how far you live away from that school, your comfort level, at what age you allow your child to walk to school by themselves. As a parent, more than willing to walk them, but then I have to get back so I can get to work. And oftentimes there's not time for that. So I think it's scheduled. There's a lot that goes into this. And so I think some of the options that you've come up with, like the walking school bus, is great, but I don't know that we've had any of those in the areas that I've lived in. And certainly I didn't know about any of them. So just comments. Yeah, there was. Those points are well taken, and sometimes what I ask myself is what changed from 40 years ago to today, and because these numbers were flipped 40 years ago, and some of them are policy changes. It's state requirements for new campuses being a certain size, which by de facto makes the campus further away than it used to be. Parents were paying single, households, and now schools can't start till 8:30.
Yeah, later start time.
But we did, to answer your question directly about the parent engagement, we did 2 different survey collectors, and 500 of the responses were because of the school-based survey, which went to parents. So we do have a lot of input. So what was the big, I mean, if 96% of kids are getting to school by being dropped off in a car, what was and you surveyed the 500 parents. There's no single thing. You just named like 10 different things, and they're all true.
Yeah, I was wondering if junior high students could be incorporated in Sabrina's. I live near one of those schools that people come from all over town, and they're junior high students, and so if that could be incorporated also, that'd be great.
I think the middle school bike ed probably needs to be expanded to, it's an idea.
Thank you, Pete.
Okay. So there's a complete streets element of our work, and I'll just define that before I move forward. Complete streets prioritize safety, comfort, and access to destinations for the most vulnerable of road users. A complete streets network makes it easy for people to cross the street, walk or bike where they need to go, and move easily with assistive devices no matter their age or ability. Features in complete streets might include more frequent crossings, multi-use trails, accessible pedestrian signals, accessible transit stops, and narrower travel lanes. Historically, some of these elements have been defined out of our streets because we've been right-sizing our streets for the steady state flow of cars. So the level of service for automobiles is a measure of how freely car traffic flows through intersections and street segments, and has been in the past, and in some funding requirements, in some funding streams, a requirement for federal funding. So in other words, in order to get some funding, you have to have your vehicles experience less delay. And some of the ways that we experience less delay in infrastructure, or we add turning pockets as an example. So we move the people who are turning out of the steady state flow of traffic. And when we do that, we take away something else. And what we've been taking away are places for trees, places for street amenities, and in maintaining this vehicle level of service, which I'm going to try not to judge too much, we have also made it, when we add these lanes, as an example, we make it harder to cross the street. It takes more time. It's just math. And so our signal cycles have to get longer because we have to accommodate a designated travel speed of people walking, and they have to walk further, so the signal cycles can get longer. Nobody really has a great experience with this way that we have been kind of building our way out of congestion to maintain a level of service for cars. And we're in a really lucky place now. We've been doing that for about 50 to 70 years, I'd argue, but recently the state of California said, well, this is not the way we're going to make decisions about our street and transportation infrastructure anymore. We're not going to use level of service we're not going to assess the impact on level of service when we make investments. And what that means is that we can make walking and biking investments without triggering, quote unquote, an impact on vehicle level of service, because we don't have to maintain that level anymore. In California, we say we don't use that threshold. People care about it, don't get me wrong. People care about vehicle delay. We will care about it here. We care about the queues of cars. We care what will happen if we take lanes away. But we don't make a California Environmental Quality Act decision based upon that anymore. So it opens up a whole new framework for evaluating what does success mean on our streets? What does a successful complete street look like when we look at all the users instead of focusing on this very narrow lens of vehicles delay? And so that can, I already described some of the things that happen when we focus on vehicle delay, but some of the things that you experience here or other places, like this is the explanation for why you experience bike lanes dropping at intersections, because we needed to maintain the level of service for cars. This is also when you experience wide multi-lane intersections that kind of grow. If you look on an aerial map and you see how some of our streets grow at the intersection, that happened because we're maintaining level of service for cars. And when you see lack of dedicated signal phasings and elements among the street, it's not like because somebody was trying to make the system worse for you to walk or bike. It's just that we had to maintain this quality. And we don't have to do that anymore from a regulatory perspective. In fact, we can't do that anymore from a regulatory perspective. But as I said, we will continue to use level of service as a decision-making tool to try to, similar to parking supply, to decide what are the right trade-offs in accordance to what type of streets we're considering those trade-offs. So as of July 2021, all local agencies in California are required to use vehicle miles traveled instead of level of service as a metric for assessing transportation impacts of transportation and land use projects instead of level of service. And the goal is to reduce vehicle miles traveled and the associated environmental impacts by making this shift at the state level. So now we're like in this really sweet time in history where we can make streets complete, and it takes more than just plopping in the benches or the wider sidewalks. We need to look at the whole lifespan of a project to influence complete streets in their totality. So the components of complete streets that we're addressing in our active transportation plan are policies and ordinances, looking at recommendations to policy tools and ordinances that will support complete streets. We looked already at the project delivery process, and that's undertaken internally for city projects, and help to put in more levers in the decision-making process where complete streets elements are effectively incorporated or at least considered at all stages of planning, budgeting, design, and operations of our infrastructure. And this is important because we're saying we need to make an intentional decision about what goes in, and we need to right-size our budgets so that we don't scope a project and then get downstream from it being a certain length or size and say, but we want to add some complete streets elements in that, and then say, well, but we didn't scope it at the start. So we want to really keep backing upstream to create a process that is deliberative, involving community development and public works and other stakeholders. And then finally in our work, we've evaluated the street design standards and guidance and made recommendations for potential changes in the existing guidance that the city of Ventura has, which is actually quite good and just needs some small measures of other options. And we're also defining a street typology, which will be incorporated into the general plan process in all likelihood. So in the days when we really cared about level of service, we also cared about the functional classification of streets. And streets are federally functionally classified. We're not proposing to change that, but I'm just going to give you a description of what it is. A local street is a street that has low traffic volumes and is intended to be like the last leg of a journey. A collector street is a street that might collect cars off those local streets and distribute them to local destinations like commercial areas or schools, as an example. And then there's a higher order street called the arterial, and those collect the traffic from the collectors and bring them to the freeways, as an example. And those designations are important for a lot of reasons, mainly funding. Federal funding is tied to the lane miles that you have in each of these classifications, but they're not important to the user, right? People don't go around and say, well, that was a nice principal arterial, right? And so the complete streets typology gives us an opportunity to look at it from the user, like create a new nomenclature for the street types in Ventura, and those will be the new nomenclature will be defined by the street function. In other words, what type of travel does the street serve? Some streets serve lots of freight vehicles, for an example. That's a different type of street than the streets that serve mostly passenger cars. Also, we'll help to define what the modal priorities are, asking the question, is the street part of an existing or planned network for walking, biking, or transit? Because different complete streets elements would go on those streets that are prioritized for those modes compared to streets that are prioritized for, as an example again, freight. And then what are the adjacent land use and destinations along the street? And this is what is mostly different than the functional classification system, because we're saying not only like what is the user experience as you're moving along it, but what is it like on the edges? And so we have defined typology, which is in draft form right now, which ties in the street function, the modal priorities, and the place types. And the nomenclature that we're using for the street function is link, connector, and thoroughfare. And then for the place types, and this is aligned with your current land uses and zoning designations, are retail mixed use, destination and recreation, neighborhood or community serving, industrial, commercial, and rural. And we have basically made a crosswalk of all of those different street types and place types. And then we will, and on top of that, we'll make an overlay, because as I described, not every street is going to be part of the priority bikeway network, but if a street is a part of the priority network, then we have recommendations for what type of infrastructure should go on that streets based upon the combination of transportation and place type and the desired user experience as they're moving along that street. So at the end of the day, we're thinking about these street typologies as what user experience should be prioritized, who should have the best experience, and who should maybe give a little because they wandered off the street that was a priority for their type of travel and onto one that was a priority for another type of travel. An example of that might be like a person driving wandered off a thoroughfare with commercial uses onto a pedestrian alley. They're no longer going to have the same experience as because they've moved into a place that's prioritized for people walking. That's what I'm trying to distinguish there about the user experience. And so we ask ourselves the questions related to these street typologies is, how do we create a shared expectation of the user experience on different street types? Is this street a place for kids to play and scoot and ride bikes, or is it a place where there should be many safe places to cross the street? Is it a place where you experience a park-like experience with shade trees and benches, or is it a street type that more supports outdoor dining, as an example? I wanted to describe two of the many different street types that we've defined. The first one is the neighborhood link. And the neighborhood link is, on the next slide, a minor street providing access to homes. And what we expect the type of experience that people should have here is they should feel comfortable with their kids playing in their front yard. Maybe they should even feel comfortable with their kids playing hopscotch on the sidewalk or in the parking lane. And the street should feel comfortable. And maybe as a driver, you should feel like you shouldn't be speeding through it because people are on the front. And it might have shade trees. In our complete streets typology, we have different elements that would be linked to each of these street types. Another example, just of the many that we've put together, is the retail or mixed-use connector. This would be a medium-sized street where people visit restaurants and shops and travel through and between neighborhoods. The type of experience that people might have here are more like, this seems a little more interesting than the last time I drove through it, because I'm driving at a slower speed and I'm noticing that there are places that I might want to visit or patronize even though I'm driving. And the street should feel like, okay, I can get through it, but also it's okay, it might be a place that I want to stop and access the land uses that are adjacent. There'll be many more opportunities to talk about the complete streets typologies. I think this is where there's a real, one of the intersections between the general plan and the active transportation plan. We are not actually typing the streets, and we're not assigning street types citywide, but we're asking ourselves the question, okay, based upon the expected user experience on the priority network, a bikeway and walking networks, what should be the elements that should be incorporated into it? So any questions or comments on complete streets and street typologies? I know that was a bit of a rush through, but I hope you have something that you'd like to say.
Nick.
I'm not quite sure if this belongs here, but maybe think of it. Is a unique circumstance to Ventura. We've got from Seaward to Garden Street, we basically, for a beach town, we have 5 points of connection for the town to the beach. And beyond that is the Great Wall of Ventura, the freeway. And I'm wondering if those points of connection, those streets could get some sort of particular, attention, designation in that. And for example, Seaward is a beautiful street where everybody drives super fast as they wind down and through the underpass of the railroad. And then we lost a big opportunity about 15, 18 years ago when we got to rebuild the bridge over the freeway at Seaward, and we did not include a separate bike link there. It was just missed completely.
Do you want to start, Drew?
I mean, I think I don't need to respond to your comment. I heard, right?
All right. Okay.
I've got your idea on my notebook here. Thank you.
Dana.
I'm realizing that my earlier comment fits more here. And I just want to say that I'm curious about how you take a street that is clearly more of an arterial, which I think Main Street through Midtown would qualify, and turn it more into one of those, hey, I'd like to slow down and, look around here a little bit. And that seems to me to be the rub. Because that is just a place people zip through when I had a chance to slow down. There's so much there. And so I don't know how that happens, when you come up against those two things, but.
Yeah, thank you. It is a challenge, and that's where some of the, trees can be really helpful to achieve that without impacting, the through movement desire. Many of the complete streets elements are related to bringing speeds down. I would say that is the fundamental that is common across all the different street types.
Other questions, comments on this part?
Okay, 20 minutes for policy. General plan is largely policy, but I think that most people have a hard time really conceptualizing of what policy is. And one of the ways that I think about policy is it provides a guidance to elected officials and decision makers where there is no specific direction to be pulled from. And so policy can be super important because it can provide this kind of framework where in the absence of very specific direction, decision makers can say, well, this decision or this choice that we're making is or isn't consistent with our policy, and therefore we should, take an action that aligns with the policy. So as it relates to active transportation, there are some already documented policies / actions that are statewide targets and regional targets. Your regional MPO is the Southern California Association of Governments, obviously, and Caltrans is your statewide governor of active transportation targets. So at the statewide level in 2017, they adopted some statewide targets, which we're going to try to help Ventura pull its weight on, right? Maybe you get ahead. So some of the places that aren't so ready to invest in walking and biking, maybe they don't double their walking or triple their bicycling and doubling their transit use, but Ventura triples their walking and quadruples its bicycling. Who knows? Another target that they set in their 2017 plan is reducing bicycle and pedestrian fatalities by 10% per year. And I will say this is a dated target. This is probably not something that they would adopt today, as the state is like many states across the country looking for zero as it relates to fatal and serious injury collisions by any mode. And then the third target here is to increase the number of complete streets projects by 20%. Regionally, some targets that were set in the 2020-2045 Regional Transportation Plan are to increase active transportation mode share from 9.2% to 12.5% by 2045, to double the future investment in active transportation, and to reduce vehicle miles traveled per capita by 5% and vehicle hours traveled by 9%. And so as we look locally to potential policy actions that could come out of our active transportation plan and inform the general plan, or maybe be the same in both, we'll figure that out later. We looked at 8 policy areas of which are also related to the goals that I described earlier, but we did the policy review before we established the goals, so that's why there are more policy areas than there are goals. Connectivity and convenience, safety and comfort, equity and accessibility, complete streets, emerging mobility, climate action, social acceptance, and implementation. And these are kind of best practice policy areas where we know if we're more innovative in these areas, that more people, we will create a better environment for people who are already walking and biking, and incentivize or improve the chance that people will shift modes and reduce the VMT, vehicle miles traveled. So some connectivity opportunities that we identified for Ventura were to define a network of streets where facilities for people walking are prioritized. And I already talked about that. We are defining networks as we speak. Also, another opportunity for connectivity is to establish a marked pedestrian crossing policy that allows for mid-block crossings in appropriate circumstances, including a decision-making rubric and design guidance and crossing spacing maximums for major streets. So that's more about saying, we want crossing spacing to be close enough together that people don't have to walk very far out of direction to make a legal crossing, and because that also provides a benefit that they might not cross mid-block because the place that they're going is actually across the street and not down the street and over and back. So there are a couple of connectivity opportunities for policy development. In safety, the city has had a neighborhood traffic management program, and we're going to be recommending that be revived. And then also recommending that the city establish a local Vision Zero policy or language establishing the reduction of traffic fatalities and serious injury crashes is a major priority. And this policy language came before the federal guidance around this, but the Safe Streets for All funding, which was Notice of Funding Opportunity, which was released in the spring, specifically looks to provide funding to cities who have a systemic safety approach to eliminating fatal and serious injury crashes. And of course, those types of crashes affect all modal users, but it is more likely that somebody walking or biking is going to die in a crash than somebody who's driving, because we have a lot of safety improvements inside of cars that protect the occupants, but we don't have them on the outside. In the equity and accessibility policy opportunity area, we've named the identification of objectives and policies to improve air quality and reduce health risks in disadvantaged communities by investing in public facilities and promoting physical activity there, and committing to equitable engagement that includes people of all races, incomes, ages, and abilities. We also are planning to recommend an equity task force if that's in alignment with the city's progress initiative as it makes progress to becoming more a part of your day-to-day decision-making. Somebody mentioned already scooters and e-things that are on the horizon but not allowed here in some, well, I don't want to get into that, but we see that there is a lot of opportunity to increase transportation options through emerging mobility offerings like e-bikes, shared scooters. There is corresponding evidence that says actually those types of devices do. Scooters mainly draw people who are walking into scootering, so we're not so supportive of those as we are of e-bikes and bike share, because those draw people out of cars. We also recommend establishing equity policies that guide such a system to serve residents equitably, including making the system accessible to traditionally underserved communities. Most of these systems are ride-based, and so they tend to place the devices in places where there will be more trips, and that tends to leave people in lower income and places with high proportions of people of color unserved by the devices. So if Ventura decides to offer bike share or e-bike share or scooting into the city, it needs to come with corresponding policies that are supportive for all residents. We see climate and the climate framework adopt transportation-specific goals and policies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, such as reduction in vehicle miles traveled, reduction in drive-alone trips, or mode shift to bicycling, walking, and transit. So just set a policy number out there and make that integrated with the climate action plan and the general plan update. On the theme of social acceptance, we recommend, these are draft, of course, so we're hoping that you'll also contribute to these or have thoughts. Adapting current bike programming to also include pedestrian education and developing a safe, or reviving and revisioning a Safe Routes to School program. So there's a bicycle advisory committee currently. This is on the subject of implementation opportunities, but we're writing an active transportation plan, and so that we need to think about how to create and consult with an advisory committee that includes a pedestrian, people who are interested in walking, and coordinate that with the bicycle advisory committee and the ADA transition plan. So we have some work to do to help frame up an implementation framework that continues to build on the great work to date, but also expands to other needs. And then complete streets policy opportunities. This is a long one. Adopt pedestrian crossing guidelines. I already talked about that. Establish desired crossing spacing. When I say, actually what I talked about was establishing desired crossing spacing, but adopting pedestrian crossing guidelines means creating a framework where it's clear what type of pedestrian crossing enhancements should be installed based upon the type of street that is being crossed. So a marked crosswalk might be very suitable in on low volume streets, as an example, but multi-lane streets, and Jeff's been doing a great job with this, multi-lane streets with multiple threat opportunities need more supportive infrastructure like pedestrian refuge islands or rectangular rapid flashing beacons. So that's about the crossing guidance. And there's great national guidance about that. Similarly, create a bicycle facility selection guidance and supportive engineering design standards that make it clear what type of facility should go where, to your point earlier. Adopt a multimodal level of service analysis methodology that moves us away from level of service being the only part of the conversation, but also asks, it can be a part of the conversation, but what will we use to evaluate the pedestrian environmental quality or the bicycle level of traffic stress? So we will definitely be recommending a multimodal level of service methodology. Assess posted speed reduction opportunities, lower thresholds for a transportation impact analysis and fee program. This is maybe related to the earlier questions about parking. It's like tangentially related to that, like helping to make decisions that make new projects, new land development projects, connected to the places that people could walk and bike to. Then codify a voluntary development incentive program and develop street concept plans process, which is just slightly different than the process that the city is using today in forwarding projects from idea to construction and operations. So as I went through those 8 policy areas and policy ideals we have, this might be a place for you to say, I couldn't hear you, we've been at this for so long, but I have a policy idea that I want to make sure that you hear about today. So any comments or questions about policy opportunities as it relates to active transportation are welcome.
And we can go slide by slide if you'd prefer, and we can go through those 8 areas if it's helpful to have that on the screen.
I would just maybe go to the one that has all the policy areas on it, unless people have specific ones.
This one.
Yeah.
So these are the broad groupings. If you do want to go to one of these topics in more detail, I can switch there
Kelsey
too.
has a comment.
Thank you. So I have a bike. I walk or bike all the time, but my job requires that I have a car. And under no circumstance will I ever not need a car because I need to go places without any notice, and public transportation would just never get me there in time. I live at the Wave, which is one of the most, I would say, sorely underparked apartment buildings in town. it would be great if people had just said, you know, we don't have parking, we're just going to adapt and we won't have cars. But that isn't how it's turned out, and so they all just spill out onto the streets. So in terms of, like, people were talking about parking earlier, I am of the opinion that that parking should really be required to be part of the development so that they don't impact the streets and that you are able to have bike lanes and open space for, you know, all the different things for active, complete streets, as opposed to letting vehicles take up a primary amount of parking.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Hi, under emerging mobility, I love to go to cities that have bike share because it affords me the opportunity to park a car once and not use it for a long period of time. I would love for you or the city to bring forward statistics on what bike sharing does to communities, reduce car trips, help the mobility of tourism and things of this sort, because I know the studies are out there. I just looked one up. There's New York City has metrics available. It'd be really good.
Yeah, great. There are ample studies available on the Portland State University TREC website that Nathan McNeil's been doing a lot of research on this subject, and we'd be happy to share some citations with you.
Thank you, Drew. Let's see. We'll just go down the...
Okay, so on the first one, the connectivity and convenience, I'm wondering, in your study or analysis of this, do you ever consider increasing either the overpasses, pedestrian overpasses over the freeways, or 126 or 101, or underpass, like tunnels or some other aspect of that? Is that part of the consideration of the process? Because a lot of, we're talking about the 101 cuts off a lot of folks, 126 cuts off people from different neighborhoods, and is that included in the thinking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's already a planned overcrossing. Where is that one that's funded? Camino Real at the Cook Grove.
Pedestrian?
Mm-hmm. Oh. And also I've spent many hours just looking in the embankments of these freeways and wondering, there's a dog park, I can't remember what it is, but at Camino Real, I'm like, there must be a way through this. So yes, we will be, I don't know how they'll make it through the process, but yes, making connections across these barriers are very important to get all your community members to the harbor, to the waterfront, to the beaches. And
thanks.
It was on two different slides, but regarding pedestrian fatalities and type of crosswalks, I have a micro point. I'm going to make a pitch for the talking crosswalk signals. There's one on Main Street and Ventura Avenue, and there's one on Thompson and California. Mm-hmm. And they get people off the dime, and they count down how long it takes you to get across the street, so you know whether to speed up or not. I'd like to see more of them.
So you'd like to see more, and that's a judgment that can be made, I think, upon request as well, right? If there are audible signals.
Yeah, we do have an informal process. We do have a request for location, so we have quite a few out now. We're just getting ready to put two more out, one at Victoria Telephone and one at Victoria Asset.
And Mr. Reardon, was your comment about, like, you want to hear the countdown also, or was it more about the additional locations?
Additional locations.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Daniel. Casey.
You mentioned that you might be reviving the neighborhood traffic management program. I'm unfamiliar with that. Can we get a quick refresher?
So I don't know how it worked, and I don't know why it was stopped, but I can define what it is. Well, neighborhood traffic calming program or management program kind of looks at an area-wide approach to reducing travel speeds through neighborhoods mainly. And the idea of a neighborhood-wide program is to say we're not going to slow down speeds on one street with speed humps or traffic circles or whatever the treatments are that are in the toolbox, and then move that speeding problem to another street. And they can be super contentious. I ran one when I was in public sector for many years, and it's oddly contentious to support people driving slowly. And so I don't know whether it was a funding barrier here or whether there were like difficulties in implementation that you want to share. But
After the 2007 for a couple of years, and then the Great Recession hit, and it was a funding issue at that point. So it's been dabbled in several years about bringing it back. It's been on Measure O list several times, just hasn't happened yet.
And something that we see in terms of how to make why neighborhood traffic calming is important to us is that streets with low traffic volumes and low speeds are more comfortable to walk and bike along and can become part of a low-stress bicycle network without much change at all. And so that's one reason why we feel strongly that that this program is worth reviving if it competes well for funding. Those elements that are typically in a traffic calm environment would become part of a neighborhood greenway network, which I didn't define that for the benefit of all of you, but we are hoping to establish a relatively dense network of low traffic stress environment ways to bicycle and walk around, and the facilities that support those low traffic stress are paths, off-street paths, protected bike lanes, and neighborhood greenways. And neighborhood greenways are at the union of traffic calming or intersection of traffic calming.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a question and a comment. The Arundel Barranca runs from Harbor all the way to Foothill. Has anyone ever considered making, and of course the 101 freeway is very problematic that it crosses, but has anybody considered making all or part of it, walking and biking?
The Barranca, you said, right?
The Arundel Barranca.
Yeah, it's on we've got our eyes on it.
Yeah,
As
and as
is
you
the
were saying,
general
crossing the freeway or tunneling through it or whatever is a big problem, but yeah, I'm just wondering if that was on anybody's radar.
Yes.
And the other thing that I'll go back to my my normal harp, and that is, don't forget that people that actually work in manufacturing areas such as the Arundel industrial area do like to walk at lunchtime, and so I would encourage that we don't omit that area from our radar, to put some nice walking areas. I noticed that there are sidewalks, but there are actually few complete sidewalks. They kind of go to the end. I mean, I see people walking all the time during their lunch break, and they have to, leave the sidewalk and walk on the street for part of it. And so I think that's an area that could be made much more pedestrian and even bike friendly.
Yeah, so in the Complete Streets typology, we identified the industrial area as a land use type, and the basic transportation amenities that we support there are connected sidewalks as a start. And I think historically we haven't invested in there because we've thought about it as a place where trucks come in, and like, who would want to walk there? But people do walk to there, and then to your point, do walk, on their breaks. So that's incorporated in our planning thinking.
Yeah, and to your comment, I think we've got some very 19th century thinking sometimes when we think about industrial areas. It's changing and it's evolving.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks.
No.
Thank you, Simran.
Anyone else? Any other thoughts?
Well, that concludes my presentation. I think that allows us the time for the public comment. I appreciate your feedback. Again, as Simran mentioned, many of our work that's finalized is on either our website or I guess on your website as well, or in preparation for this meeting. It was you who said where they were, Netta. But we'll be around for another 6 months or so, and encourage you to participate in future engagement efforts, and directly through this effort, of course, but also we'll be hosting some engagement pop-ups when we release the networks and the potential projects, and that'll be a few week-long period of engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew.
Yeah, thank you so much to Drew and the ATP team for being here. We're going to transition to public comment. I feel very loud. And so we'll go ahead and call your names, and Simran will provide you a mic. We do have a number of speakers tonight, so if you could limit your public comment to 2.5 minutes so we can get through everyone, and then we'll come back together and we'll briefly touch on next steps. So GPAC, you're informed of what's coming on the horizon in terms of public engagement and next GPAC meetings. And that'll take us through to the rest of the meeting. So I'm going to go ahead and call everyone by name. I apologize in advance if I mispronounce your name. I'm so sorry. I will do my best. So I'll call the first speaker and then the next speaker, and if you don't mind lining up. First we have Bert Handy as the first public comment. And then Simran's right here with the mic, I'm sorry. And then Luciano Morales after that. Thank you, and again, 2.5 minutes. Thank you so much. Go ahead, sir.
You say 2 minutes?
2.5 minutes.
2.5 minutes. Okay. A couple of things that I was looking at. One of the biggest problems I see in town is storage for bicycles. I see that there's a lot of thefts of bicycles by the homeless people, and we need to have some kind of storage for the bikes to be able to be safe downtown, to have people use them. Another thing is the low-speed vehicles. I don't know whether you're familiar with a low-speed vehicle, but that is a vehicle that goes 25 miles an hour. It's electric, and they're limited to speed limits of 35-mile-an-hour streets. There is no way to get across town on something like that because all your streets that go east and west are over 35 miles an hour. So that's something, if you have your retirement communities, your mobile home places, if they had the electric vehicles or low-speed vehicles, they could go to the local shopping centers and stuff like that. But I think that needs to be incorporated in your area. Now, another area that I'm really concerned with is the Poli Street area. And because of all the traffic downtown, I live on Poli. I've lived there for 35 years, so I know it very well. I believe that the city should look at reintroducing a one-way street between Pacific and Lincoln. Now, if you're going, and the travel on the one-way would be westbound. That way it's going uphill, and most of your traffic that comes that way basically goes westbound. Eastbound, you've got 8 access roads from Poli to Main Street. They can drop down on any of those streets and go down, and then they can come back up. If you look at Pacific, when you're going from Main Street to Poli, there is a right-hand turn lane right there that you wouldn't even have to stop at because it's currently in the area. Pacific is also a wide street. This would alleviate a lot of the traffic on Poli, but it would allow the traffic flow to go very well as far as that I can see. That would allow you to take the area between Lincoln and Pacific, where between Lincoln and Live Oak, there is no sidewalk on one side of the streets, and people race that street all the time. I've lived there, as I said, for 35 years, and pulling into my own driveway, I've been hit 3 times over that period of time. So, you know, it's really an unsafe area, and I think that's something the city could do. It's not going to really affect a lot of things, and by doing that, you could actually run a lane to go west or eastbound that would allow pedestrians and bicycles to go on that right-hand side. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. If we could hold applause, thank you so much. Luciano Morales, and do you mind? Thank you. And then after, Mark Velasquez, followed by Amy Sherry.
All right. So my name is Luciano. I'm from Oxnard, but I went to high school in Ventura, and this is my business. Currently, I can't operate because there's a law against it. It was an emergency ordinance that was put in 2018, and we're a locally owned business, and I was raised here, so I take care of my community, and we take the impact of public peace, health, and safety of business owners, tourists, and the local community very seriously, and we don't intend to operate without the permission of the government. And we're aware that some businesses struggle. Oh, I don't have PowerPoint. But you've seen these all around town, LA, they're everywhere. But I have infrastructure ways that can help reduce all of that, such as parking zones, and we use geofencing technology to get that done. And we also, people hate them on the sidewalks. So one way that we go around that is that when they fall, people don't pick them up. And mine has dual kickstands, so it reduces the risk of them falling over. And in the event that somebody does push it over, I get notified and I'm gonna be picking it up within 15 minutes of the drop. And Drew made a comment about how bikes take cars off the road and scooters take walkers off the road. And since 2019, there's been over 200 million rides on these types of scooters and bikes, and only 20% of those rides were on a bike. Scooter, here we go. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, sir. Next is Mark Velasquez.
And who's after that?
And then after that is Amy Sherry.
You can stay back.
You can stay back there.
It's 2:30, right?
Yes, go ahead.
Ready. Hi, everyone. My name is Mark. Active transportation is really important in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, especially considering I'm fairly confident that most people in attendance either drove here or got a ride here, including me, not gonna lie. I use transit to get to and from work, and the fact that an 8-minute drive from Victoria downtown is an hour on transit is very egregious. For parking and most delays, while I'm on transit, happen because of people looking for on-street parking, people in traffic going down Main Street or Thompson, going up and down Victoria, and most of the areas where I feel unsafe walking are often dominated by cars and are, very strip mall feeling. Reducing parking requirements for new developments or not allowing on-street parking, especially on Main, will help with these issues, I feel. For safe routes to school, my niece lives with me, and I would love for her to have a safe route to Elmhurst, but just like me going to VC, a few years ago, a mile walk to my house is about an hour and a half walking because of the 126, so expediting that pedestrian bridge to El Camino would help greatly. Micromobility and ride shares are great options, especially for tourists. Going to uni in the Bay helped my friend, or I know scooters and e-bike shares help my friends and I get to and from major destinations after getting off transit. I can see how that would help with congestion here downtown or, for tourists coming to Ventura. And widening sidewalks is also hella important. I would support removing car storage or travel lanes to support this, especially on Telegraph, because, there's just electric poles in the middle of the sidewalk that if you have a stroller or a wheelchair, or God forbid, 2 people in wheelchairs have to cross each other, it's totally unsafe. And yeah.
Thank you. Amy Sherry, followed by Allison Carlson.
Hi. Kind of a few things, really. Since it's part of the general plan, parking, transportation, until we have at least half of the infrastructure in place, I don't see how you could start giving less parking spaces. I think it was you who said it just pushes cars onto the street, which makes safe streets even harder to accommodate because now people are parking on the streets. So there's got to be some kind of happy medium somewhere, but I don't think just stopping developers from having to have parking spaces is the answer until there's some pathways for people to take the bikes or a bus. The bus system here is terrible. We don't have a subway. We have a very limited train that stops over off Johnson and the fairgrounds, which is the whole city in between. So I don't really see that being an option as well. Just please take into consideration that people drive. People have to drive. We work, a lot of us do work out of town to afford living here because it's really expensive. And that's pretty much it. Just saying, reduce parking doesn't fix anything.
Thank you. Allison Carlson, followed by Kathy Bremer.
A couple things. First, I don't know if this first thing is in your jurisdiction, but we have an RV and we love to drive it and take extended trips. And we are always grateful when a community has a waste treatment plant that has a free dump site for RVs. And for Ventura, you see a lot of RVs, people living in them. My question is, where are they dumping their waste? I don't know that we have a dump available in Ventura. I think it would be a good idea at the waste treatment plant to have a free RV dump so that people can go there and take care of that, and so it's not going in the streets or wherever. Next thing is about development in general. I think we need to stop developing until we have assurance that we have the water to support it. We've had a lot of development these past few years. Recently, the Crab Shack, all those apartments up there, a bunch of apartments in the harbor, the East End, a bunch of new homes there. There's development going up downtown. And here we are asked to cut back on water again. And they're raising the rates in July. So we obviously do not have the water to support more people if they're asking us to cut back as it is. And we've been asked to cut back before, and now this is another cutback. And everybody I talk to, we just don't understand it. We don't understand how you can keep building houses and say, somehow we're gonna have the water to provide for those houses. It just does not make any sense. At some point, you have to say, in my mind, I'm sorry, but until we can get more water, we're just full up. At some point, you got to say we're full up, and we just cannot support having more people here and more homes, more development. And we have, what do we have? The El Torito. There's a new hotel going down there. Where's the water going to come for that? It just does not make sense to keep putting out more houses, more new buildings when we can't even have the water right now to service the people that are here.
Thank you.
That is my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Right at 2:30. Thank you. Kathy Bremmer's next, then followed by Chris Roberts, please.
I saw a lot of good things tonight, wider sidewalks, protected bike lanes. I'm very excited about that. The other thing, since we do have cars on the road, is enhanced signals at intersections. I think it was in San Diego, I saw one that was green light for pedestrian, but a turn arrow with a line through it. Because what ends up happening to you when you're a pedestrian is you walk up to the corner and you're going to cross here, but there are cars coming behind you that are going to turn right in front of you as you're trying to walk. So that turn with a line through it would hopefully get their attention that they probably shouldn't turn because there could be people in the crosswalk. So I don't know if you set that up on the same button that you get your pedestrian walk sign, I think. But I'm sure you're familiar with those? Oh, great. I would love to see some of those in Ventura. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Roberts, followed by Carol Spector.
I appreciate the thoroughness that the process has been following. It looks really good. The only thing that I would hope you can still emphasize, even though it's probably not going to be a goal, is quality of life. You've got a lot of safety and a lot of really important things that you have to consider, but the quality of life and the compatibility with the outdoor character of Ventura should be considered with those decisions. And so I hope you'll find a way to integrate that in a little bit stronger. Just as an example, they're considering a bridge over the railroad tracks at the citrus plant. And the quickest way to get to the beach from the citrus plant is to seaward and down, and that's what I'm reading about. If you've ever walked that route, it's horrible. Nobody walks that route. Everybody goes along Vista Del Mar, down the alley, all the way to the pier, and it's a lovely experience. It represents the best of what Ventura is. And so if the distance is your primary consideration, you're missing the point. The point is the quality of life, and I hope that will get integrated into your work in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Carol Spector, followed by Christy Weir.
First of all, thank you for the chairs. That was really nice. I appreciate that. And thank you, GPAC members, for putting the time in. I was watching when we were doing Zoom. Kelsey, you took the words out of my mouth, but I'm going to say it anyway. I live on Poli, and we all have single-car garages, so we need our street parking. And why do we need cars? Because our jobs and markets are not within walking distance. I'm lucky. I'm retired. I don't use my car all that often, so I can walk, but truly, it's really not practical. The safety issue, I was going to talk about the wave. There's just not enough parking, and people are parking under the bridges, under the freeway, and I too believe it's kind of pie in the sky to have less parking right now for new developments rather than adequate parking. Yes, it would be nice if we're all out of our cars, but that's just not the reality. So I would like to ensure that we have enough parking every time that, like for example, Front Street, they're putting in a lot of projects. There's really nothing walkable there, and yet they're having less than one space per place, and most of them are going to have 2 people, 2 cars. So that's my concern.
Thank you. Christy Weir, followed by Wendell.
Thank you. This general plan is going to be setting the stage for 20 years in the future. And those 20 years are going to be about walking. If you traveled anywhere recently, you will see that cities all over the world are prioritizing active transportation. So my vision for this general plan is to have the core of this plan be about active transportation, because that will be our lives and that will be our future. And not just an add-on, but every single element of new development. The complete streets needs to be way more than 20% increase. Every street we look at, every development we look at, every part of town needs to be a complete street. That means a sidewalk, a wide sidewalk, an unimpeded sidewalk, an ADA sidewalk. That means crosswalks, that means street trees, that means big bike lanes, and that needs to be the basics, right? And we could do even better than that. We have 3 freeways in town. We have the 126, the 101, and the 33. If you want to go fast, we have 3 freeways to go fast. You have to think in the future for the next 20 years about slower, not speed. We need to think about health. Our priority needs to be about walking, biking, maybe scootering. 20 years from now, who knows what the technology will be? But the core of our thinking has to be about health, not speed. And that's a switch, right? And a lot of cities are doing that. They're switching their vision away from faster, 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 to more healthy and more outdoors and more active. And as the climate gets hotter, we're going to need more shade in order to do this walking and biking, which includes trees. So every single element of this general plan, the parks, the transportation, the development, the land use, they all need to be about the ability to walk everywhere and bicycle everywhere. And that's a big vision, but I believe that's the correct vision for the next 20 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Wendell, followed by Todd.
Thank you. Public speaking is not my strong suit, so I'm just going to read a prepared statement. And I want to speak about the traffic problems in residential neighborhoods, not just for myself, but for young families and with small children. We are putting their health at risk by allowing heavy traffic in residential neighborhoods. Living and working in the same neighborhood, walking and riding your bike to work or to the store is a lovely dream. But
When you go out into the real world, things are very different. Cars and trucks rush through our town, hurrying to drop off kids at school, commuting to work, and going to various stores to pick up food and supplies. Bike lanes and sidewalks are empty throughout the city, while traffic rips through our neighborhoods at highway speeds, polluting the air that our children breathe. There's more road congestion now than there ever has been, and will only get worse if we don't do something about it. The closure of Main Street has pushed more traffic onto Poli, which has become the default crosstown highway. We have over 8,000 cars a day with speeds up to 65 miles an hour on Poli. Drivers on Poli routinely exceed the speed limit, ignore crosswalks and stop signs. Toxic emissions from all these vehicles threaten the health and safety of nearby residents, young and old. Ventura has created a public health hazard for residential neighborhoods, which could result in serious legal ramifications for the city, and comprehensive measures need to be taken now. I urge the advisory committee to advocate for adding stop signs through the residential sections of Poli, Foothill, and San Nicolas, and with the restriping of Main Street to add back the additional lanes from Fur to Seaward that were removed in the last restriping. We must encourage drivers to use commercial roadways like Main and Thompson to drive cross town, and we should look at one-way streets to expand capacity. By encouraging traffic into high-capacity roadways, we can free up residential neighborhoods for walking, biking, in a safer and cleaner environment. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And then next, Todd. If there's anyone else with public comment. Oh.
One of the issues that came up by one of the committee members had to do with terminology. I noticed that many of the policies and objectives refer to biking or walking, and yet we had the scooter demonstration here. There's plenty of skateboards, and all of those sort of vehicles come in the manual mode or electrified now. And I'm hoping that you can include these in the parameters and some definitions, but also start looking at our sidewalks, the bike routes, and the streets to accommodate the new varied versions of transportation, because they're all being used now, but they're not being well accommodated. The second part, many people have referenced the issue of increased traffic, or excuse me, parking on streets because of parking limitations posed by the state or city plans. It pushes more cars onto streets, and that happens to be impeding the use of safe streets to schools, many other bike routes. I travel Aurora constantly on a bicycle. That's a Class 2 route, and as more cars are parked there, there leaves no room to dodge into and out of the way of traffic. So I think there should be some priority given to maintaining higher parking standards on some of these select streets. And I know you're not going to be able to keep all the parking standards kind of restricted, but the more the better, and particularly on priority streets. And lastly, while up in the county line at Carpinteria, I ran into a gentleman who was cycling down from Vancouver, British Columbia. He was from England, and he was trying to find his way south. And he had camping gear and so forth. And I said, well, there's no place to stop in Ventura, quite literally. And I'd hope somewhere in the transportation plan there'd be a reference to the city endorses and hopes that the state parks at San Buenaventura State Beach Park would have a hike and bike facility, because there is nothing in our county until you get to Point Magoo, and you have to go 50 miles, and that can be awkward distance. So hopefully that can be an inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, Susan.
I'm Susan Vinson. I'm a teacher in the school district. I've lived here, 40, 50 years. There are no sidewalks on any of these new complexes that are being built. I understand there's been a lot of negotiating for this and that, and they give up more passage towards the street as they build bigger and bigger buildings. Nobody I know is happy about the building that's going on. I understand we have some mandates from the state. I don't know why we can't challenge those mandates. And I would like to know, and I will yield back my time, if someone will tell me, where is the water coming from? We can give up sidewalks to create more housing, but where's the water coming from? Anybody? Nobody?
So this is public
Everybody
comment.
I know wants to know, including me. Okay, well, I'll just go back and report to my colleagues that nobody knows.
We were told Sacramento said we can't say we can't build because there's no water.
Well, I understand that we could challenge that legally somehow. So I think we should think about other ways to get around this. It's going to be a disaster.
Thank you. And that's all the public speakers, unless someone else had a speaker card? No.
Kelsey did have a question.
Sure.
So one of the concessions that developers are often asking for is reduced parking requirement, given the affordable housing units that they build. But realistically, a developer will, if the tenants that they're looking to get require parking and there is no street parking available to them, then they would likely incorporate the parking into their own building, because otherwise they'll have occupancy issues if they can't accommodate that. So would a way of reducing, could we reduce street parking by making that a bike lane or some sort of walking pedestrian path, so that the developer is actually responsible for incorporating the parking into his own project as opposed to letting it just be someone else's problem? Just an idea.
Yeah, they can't use street parking as part of their parking requirement. But we can.
Just like that's what they end up doing. So rather, I'm not saying they're saying street parking is part of the requirement, but if their tenants don't have any parking available, they're not going to want to live there. So it's just an economic incentive for them to incorporate the parking.
Okay. Well, we are coming to the end of our meeting. Thank you for the members of the public who sat with us and for all your public comments. Just for the GPAC, if we could just quickly touch on next steps. Just upcoming meetings and engagement. And I'm sorry for those members of the public, if you don't mind just giving us 2 minutes. Thank you. So upcoming meetings and engagement on active transportation as well as the general plan. There is continued active transportation outreach, surveys, pop-ups, and ways to engage if you'd like to on that topic. Winter 2022, there'll be a draft plan for public review. On the general plan side, we, as we touched earlier, are moving into outreach on land use alternatives. So coming through starting in August all the way through fall, we'll be doing pop-up workshops, open houses, community meetings, and going to the community councils to discuss those land use alternatives. So we'll be in touch in regards to the August meeting, if we'll be holding that or if we'll go dark, giving opportunity for all those engagements. And then we might also reach out if anybody is willing to assist in some of these outreach events and would like to, opportunities for the GPAC to also be involved. So thank you everybody so much for tonight. I meant to mention at the beginning, Doug and Lori apologize that they couldn't be here. They wanted to, but due to illness and such, they weren't able to be here tonight. But thank you, everybody. We'll send out the PowerPoint presentation if you'd like to review that. And if you do have comments or feedback, please feel free to email me with any of your ideas on policies or any of the active transportation plan.
Netta, if I can remind everyone, the open house for the Climate Action and Resilience Plan is tomorrow and on Thursday, so if you can find time to attend at least one of those. There'll be a virtual opportunity in mid-August as well, but if you can spread the word, come and attend, share your thoughts, we'd greatly appreciate it.
What's the time on that?
6 o'clock?
6 o'clock.
In
And
the
it's
atrium.
It's in the atrium.
Thank you, everybody, so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good night.